And we didn't get the chance to also wish you Merry Christmas. That's gone. But welcome back to the TRRC. We would start our 11th session this morning, and the proceedings would begin shortly. Before we do that, may I ask our religious leaders to have some prayers. Imam Jallo, you have the floor, please.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين الله الذي جعل لكم الأرض قرارا والسماء بناء وصوركم فأحسنوا صوركم ورزقكم من طيبات ذلكم الله ربكم فتبارك الله رب العالمين هو الحي لا إله إلا هو فادعوه مخلصين له الدين الحمد لله رب العالمين ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين آمين.
Ameen. Shukran, Imam Jallo. Bishop, you have the floor.
Lord God Almighty, we as TRRC and the nation, the Gambia, thank you for the proceedings of the past year. As you have brought us into the beginning of another new year, 2020, we commit the proceedings during this year, 2020, under your direction, under your protection, your providence, your security, and your defense. And we continue to pray that all who will be coming to be witness in these sittings, we pray that, Lord, each and every one of them will resolve to come here to speak the truth, and that you will grant the commission the discerning spirit to be able to discern between truth and falsehood. And so we continue to ask for patience in the populace of the Gambia, that they allow the proper process, due process, to take place. So they are about to bring about healing, to bring about reconciliation and reparation. And then you, the judge of all mankind, will do your own judgment. This we ask through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, Bishop. Before we have a witness, I will read a statement as we normally do on behalf of the Commission and as we start our new session. The statement reads as follows. On Thursday, December 5th, 2019, the TRRC concluded its 10th three-week session of public hearings. During that session, which focused on former President Jami's witch hunts, and saw the Commission's first set of regional hearings conducted in the Greater Banjul area, Jambur, Sibanor, and Essel, 37 witnesses appeared before the Commission. The total number of witnesses appearing before the Commission since the commencement of the public hearings on 7 January 2019 is now 188. These include 51 women, 35 perpetrators, alleged perpetrators and adversely mentioned persons, and 23 Gambian diaspora witnesses who testified via video link. In addition to the public hearings, one closed-summer hearing and 2 protected witness hearings were held during 2019. This 11th session of public hearings, the first in 2020, begins today, January 20, and will end on Thursday, February the 6th. The Commission had initially planned to start this hear some hearings with testimonies from victims of the former president's alternative HIV, AIDS, and other ailment treatment program. However, due to circumstances beyond our control, this was not possible. The present session will therefore start with testimony from an expert witness as envisaged under the relevant provisions of the Trrc Act and the Commission's Rules of Procedure. The expert witness will focus on the making of the Jami dictatorship. The session will then continue with testimonies on the violation of the rights of religious leaders, both Muslim and Christian, that happened under the previous regime. During the course of the session, and should the need arise, witnesses on other themes may be invited to testify before the Commission. As we begin this 11th session of public hearings, we brace ourselves for yet again another series of revelations of human rights abuses and violations perpetrated against the people of this country by the very government that was supposed to protect their lives and liberties. Since hearings started in January 2019, the Commission, and indeed the Gambian people, and all who have been following our proceedings, heard the most horrendous violations of human rights and abuses. From the extrajudicial killings of November 11th, 1994 victims, to the murder of Usman Koro Sise, the murders of innocent people like Dede Hydra, Aruna Jami, Mercy Jami, the April 2000 student victims, and the sexual violence meted out to several young women by none other than the custodians of the state. The graphic confessions of the junglers almost made it imperative to wonder whether reason itself had gone mad in this country. But nothing prepared us for the revelations of the 2009 witch hunts sponsored by the state. Anyone who watched and listened to the testimonies of the witch hunt victims is not likely to forget any time soon or to outgrow the feeling of sadness that was generated by the senseless pain inflicted on those victims. During the dark and the tragic episode of our nation's history, hundreds of innocent men, women, and children, even children, were picked up at random by security forces, accompanied by quack witch doctors, subjected them to all manner of humiliating treatment, and forced them to drink strange concoctions that instantly caused them to momentarily lose their senses. At least by our count, at the close of our session, 39 people died as a result of the concoctions. Up to this day, hundreds continue to struggle with seemingly intractable health conditions. And all this executed by our own security forces on the orders of the highest authority in the land, whose sacred duty it was to serve and protect the people. It is perhaps common knowledge that only a fraction of the victims of the witch hunt gave statements to the Trrc or came forward to testify publicly. We believe that a significant number of victims chose not to come forward to testify. Many victims were dissuaded from giving statements or having family members testify on their behalf for fear of stigmatization that comes from being branded a witch in our culture and the society. The abiding shame and the pain that comes with such branding can only be imagined and may never be fully described, even by the victims themselves, simply because it defies description. Victims who testified before the Commission during our last summer session spoke of the extraordinary humiliation they suffered and continue to suffer since the false allegations of witchcraft were leveled against them by agents of the state 10 years ago. The devastating impact of the 2009 witch hunts on the survivors and their families calls for sober reflection by all Gambians. Indeed, considering the magnitude of the shame and the pain suffered by these victims and their families on a day-to-day basis, we dare say that as a country, we need to reform some of our cultural attitudes. The work ahead of us as a Commission and as a country will not be easy. The path will be rocky and tear-filled, and the challenges will be daunting. But with determination and the use of reason, we can see the successful completion of this important national project and collectively move our country towards abiding peace, reconciliation, healing, and a well-deserved justice for all victims of human rights violations in this country. We are certain that together, as a nation, Gambians will successfully emerge from this painful process a stronger and a better people who will never again allow their human rights and the dignities to be violated with impunity. The Commission continues to encourage all victims of human rights violations and abuses to come forward and give statements to the Commission. On that note, the TRRC continues to crave the support and the blessings of all members of the public at home and abroad as we begin this 11th session of public hearings today. Thank you all very much, Emma, for your kind attention. That's the end of the statement from the commissioners. Council, are we ready with this morning's witness? If we are, you may proceed. You may also want to throw some light on the appearance of expert witnesses in exercises like this. Please proceed, Council.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, colleagues here present, and members of the audience. Mr. Chair, as you rightly mentioned, this morning we're hoping to hear from an expert to explain to us who Jami was, what made him tick, and how he became a dictator in the Gambia. The act of the Commission empowers the Commission to interview any individual, group, or members of organizations and institutions, obviously with the objective of those individuals may testify before the Commission. Under this particular provision, the term any individual could include an expert. So already under this provision, the Commission is empowered to interview an expert if the Commission thinks that such a person's expertise is required with a view to discharging the Commission's mandate. But additionally, Mr. Chair, Section 15.3 of the Act states as follows, that the Commission may undertake investigation and research into key events, causes, patterns of abuse or violations, and hold public sessions on such themes and institutions as it considers appropriate. Also under this particular provision,
the ability to conduct research and investigations into key events and patterns and so forth. It allows the Commission to use the services of an expert to conduct any of these investigations or investigative activities and research. So clearly, this particular section enables the Commission to bring in an expert. The use of an expert is also contemplated under Section 18(4) of the Act, where committees, the committees of the Commission are allowed to bring in people with expertise in areas that are not available within the Commission so that they can assist the Commission in its work. So on those basis, Mr. Chair, it was decided to invite an expert to conduct research on the issue of how Jami became a dictator, how it had impacted Gambia, with a view to getting the expert to help the Commission to understand that question. And Mr. Chair, with the permission of the Commission, experts were identified, a particular expert chosen in the person of Professor Dr. Adboulie Saine, and a letter of mandate and terms of reference were prepared and sent to him. It was on that basis that he prepared a report, which he is to present to the Commission today, of course, with your permission. Thank you.
Thank you, Council. I believe you can confirm also that this is the first of perhaps several expert witnesses coming as we proceed with our work.
Indeed, that is so, Mr. Chair. As the Commission proceeds in its work, there are particular areas where the Commission does not have expertise, and it would engage experts in those relevant areas to come and testify before the Commission to explain things for the Commission so that the Commission would have a better understanding of those highly specialized areas. One area to easily contemplate is the HIV/AIDS treatment program, or the Presidential Alternative Treatment Program, as it is broadly called. Some of the things in those treatments are highly specialized, and the Commission will require the assistance of experts to explain some of these things. So in that regard, we contemplate the use of experts.
Thank you very much, Council. With that preliminary, maybe we can now proceed with bringing the witness, if you're ready with the expert witness.
Yes, but before then, I take the pleasure to introduce
Please.
Mrs. Hadi Dande Njai Jabi. I hope I called it well. As Deputy Lead Counsel, who we have the privilege of working with in the past few days, and we hope well, she's here to join us, and we welcome her very well and wish her well in this difficult journey that all of us have embarked upon. So, Mr. Chair, perhaps at another forum, she would meet with all the commissioners and be more properly introduced. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, welcome to the team, Hadi, and I think I told you earlier, you are joining laborers in the same vineyard. We would tell you where the good grapes are hiding. But welcome to the Commission, and welcome to the team.
If you want to see them, just follow the chairman.
Please proceed, Council.
Thank you very much. May I ask that the witness be brought in, please?
Professor Abdoulaye Saine.
I, Professor Abdoulaye Saine. I, Professor Abdoulaye Saine.
Do swear that.
Do swear that.
I'll speak the truth.
I'll speak the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please take a seat. Professor Saine, welcome to the TRRC. Thank you for your willingness to take up this difficult task we had given you, a task which you have discharged with distinction. And thank you also for taking the trouble to come all the way from Miami, Ohio, to come and appear and testify before this commission and to help us understand a very difficult topic that many Gambians are grappling with. So welcome, Professor Saine.
Thank you, Late Counsel.
Your task was contained in a letter of mandate or terms of reference that was sent to you sometime in February of 2019, correct?
Correct.
Mr. Osher, could you kindly assist, please, and provide Professor Saine? Can you provide him with a copy of the TORs, please?
Thank you.
Could you take a look at the document and let us know whether this is the document that you received containing the letter of mandate and the terms of reference for the exercise you are to embark upon?
Yes, it is.
And you would confirm that point 1 in the terms of reference states that you are requested to prepare a written expert report on the following topics. You were to do a clear analysis and succinct presentation of your findings on the overall historical, political, socio-economic, and cultural context that led to the violations and abuses of human rights in the Gambia from July 1994 to January 2017. And in so doing, you were asked the following questions. 1, what were the historical and socio-political context and antecedents, including seminal political events, that led to the military takeover of the civilian government in 1994, correct?
Correct.
You were also asked in point 2, what were the circumstances and factors that enabled the gradual erosion of human rights and democratic norms and ultimately led to the creation, consolidation, and sustenance of the Jami dictatorial regime. This analysis should include, among other things, an examination of the relevant social and cultural factors, including tribal and gender norms, as well as traditional practices. Correct?
Correct.
You were also asked to explain how former President Jami evolved from a low-ranking military ruler to a deified dictator, presiding over a regime marked by allegations of widespread human rights violations and abuses.
Correct.
I could see that has drawn some smile on the face of the chairman. So be ready for an interesting discussion. And the fourth point, you were asked to provide a general overview of the nature, extent, system, and patterns of alleged abuse and violations of human rights that were characteristic of the Jami regime. This should include an overview of the experiences of different social groups, including women and children.
Correct.
We were also asked what were the underlying motives and perspectives that led to the commission of the alleged human rights violations and abuses.
Correct.
And the sixth point was what was the role of state institutions, in particular those within the executive branch led by former President Jami, as well as the legislative and judicial branch, in eroding the democratic norms that led to the dictatorship and allegations of human rights violations and abuses.
Correct.
And 7, you were asked, to the extent possible, and without attributing responsibility for human rights violations and abuses, to identify the role of various security forces in politics, democracy, and the democratization process in general, as well as enabling alleged human rights violations and abuses.
Correct.
You were also asked to identify the role of private organizations and group associations, including religious and community leaders, in contributing to the erosion of democratic norms and values that led to dictatorship and human rights abuses and violations.
Correct.
And on point 8, you were asked, was there a state or organizational policy pursuant to which the alleged human rights violations and abuses occurred? What was the policy and how was it effected?
Correct.
These were the questions you were basically asked. You took the liberty to add 2 more questions.
Yes.
Just to make the discussion perhaps more complete.
Correct.
Yeah. And you were asked in your report to detail the methodology that you have used, and also to attach a biography or curriculum vitae of yourself. Correct?
Absolutely.
Mr. Chair, those were the terms of reference and the mandate that Professor Saine was given. So we would ask that this document be admitted in evidence as Exhibit 108A.
Request granted.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I have read out almost the document in its entirety, so it's not necessary to pass it over. Now, Mr. Saine, you were appointed as an expert to look into these questions. We would want to now test your expertise, first know who you are, and satisfy the Commission that you have the necessary educational background and the relevant training and experience to be able to discharge the mandate you have been given. So could you tell us your full names, date of birth, and educational background?
Thank you, Lead Counsel. My name is Adboulie Saine. I was born in 1951 in Cohort. I attended primary school in Cohort from about 1958-57 to 1962, when I proceeded to Hermitage High School. Graduating in 1968, and thereafter trained as a teacher at Yundum College. That really dates me. Following training at Yundum College, I taught for 3 years at Caravan Junior Secondary School and Crab Island for about 2 weeks before I left for the States in 1974 to pursue higher education. I did my first degrees at the University of Denver, where I graduated with a BA in political science and anthropology.
What year was that?
I was there in 1975, and I graduated in 1978.
What did you do after that?
After that, I went to the Norman Patterson School of International Affairs.
Where would that be?
At Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada, where I did a master's in conflict management, resolution / development studies.
And that was in which year?
That was in 1978 through 1979. And shortly after that, I went back to Denver, where I did another master's in political economy, African studies, and a variety of other subjects in the area of international relations.
And you graduated in which year?
I graduated with a PhD in 1989.
But prior to the PhD, you completed the master's, you said, in international political economy.
Yes.
I imagine you finished that in 1981. Correct?
In 81, yes.
All right. And then when did you start your PhD?
I started the PhD around 1982-83, shortly after I finished the master's. It was required that you would take an additional year or two to do the master's before plunging into the PhD.
And when did you complete your PhD?
In 1989.
1989.
Yes.
And what did you do your PhD on?
My dissertation was an exploration into the relationship between economic dependence and political violence. In other words, military interventions, coup d'etats, and so forth and so on. It looked at more specifically at the discourse surrounding Marxist ideas about development and issues surrounding modernization theory.
Could you take that again? Issues surrounding?
Modernization theory.
Modernization theory.
Yes, and basically neo-Marxist theory. Basically assessing them, comparing them as to the degree to which they were able to explain and predict the occurrences of political violence, coup d'etats in the so-called third world countries.
In a sense, in your PhD, what you looked into was how military governments or military rulers explain themselves and how they come across to the people, and you try to dissect them, compare them, so that, their posture, what they do, and how they do things are better explained. Is that what you looked into?
Yes, that was part of the dissertation. But really, it was also focused on the degree to which foreign interventions would occur. This was in the context of the Cold War, when this former Soviet Union and the United States were very active in toppling, supporting military and client regimes in furtherance of their economic and political interests.
Interesting. After you completed your PhD, what did you do?
I taught for 1 year at Colorado State University. I was an instructor, and I taught courses in...
Which year was that?
That was just before I finished in 88, for a year.
88, 89.
88, 89,
year,
yes.
For that matter. And since then you have been in academia, correct?
Yes.
And I'd imagine you now called professor, so I'd imagine that you progressed through the ranks.
Absolutely.
To reach that lofty position of
Absolutely.
Professor Emeritus.
Absolutely.
So after being an instructor in Colorado State University, you became a visiting assistant professor in the Department of Political Science in Washington State University, correct?
Correct.
That was in 89 to 91.
That was in 89 till 1991. Yes.
And thereafter, you also became a visiting assistant professor in Miami University in Ohio.
Yes, correct.
And that's the university you still teach in.
Yes.
And you started in 1998.
1998.
Yes. And you still work there.
I still work there, yes.
That would be how many years?
21 years.
21 years. Wonderful.
That dates me.
You're basically a permanent fixture there.
Well, if you want to say that, yes.
And you still look the same when you were there in 1998.
Thank you.
Good. So in 2000 to 2003, you served as assistant professor in the Department of Political Science, correct?
Yes.
And you became an associate professor from July 2003 to June 2011.
Yes.
And you became an interim chair of the Political Science Department from August 2009 to July 2010.
Correct.
And you chaired the Diplomacy and Global Politics program in the spring of 2012 to the fall of 2017.
Correct.
And from 2011 to the present, you were a professor.
Correct.
Full professor, right?
Correct.
And looking at the CV you have provided, it's very bulky, Mr. Chair. It feels like a book. So I'll just read out a few things in it. You've made several publications, 5 books published under your name, correct?
Correct.
The first is State and Society in the Gambia since Independence, 1965 to 2012. And that was published under Africa World Press.
Yes, that was an edited volume.
And edited volume.
Yes.
Yes, by, edited with Ibrahim Assise.
Yes.
Doctor, and
Dr.
Ibrahim Assal. Also
Dr. Ibrahim
Dr.
Assal,
Ali
yes.
Imagine. Yes. And Culture and Customs of Gambia, that was published in 2012.
Yes.
And the third is Elections and Democratization in West Africa, 1990 to 2009. And that was with Babu Karinjai and Machurin Hungnipko.
Honigpo, yes.
Honigpo. Good, thank you for that. And the fourth book is The Paradox of Third Wave Democratization in Africa. The Gambia under AFPRC-APRC rule, 1994 to 2008, correct?
Correct.
In fact, that book talks about the Jami regime pretty much.
Yes.
From its beginning to perhaps the middle of its tenure, that
Yes.
is up to 2008. And the fifth book, entitled Not Yet Democracy, West Africa's Slow Farewell to Authoritarianism. And that was with still the same set of individuals.
Yes.
Babu Karinjai and Hunipko.
Honigpo.
Yes. That was your fifth book. And also in this book is all about authoritarianism, dictatorships, and so forth.
Yes.
And you also have some books in progress. One is Locating Len Repeaters in Gambian Literature in English. You did that with, you're working on that with Ibrahim Sankara.
Ibrahim Sankara, yes, the sportsman.
Yes, it's not yet published.
No.
And you are also working on a book entitled The 2016 Landmark Presidential Elections in the Gambia.
Yes, we in fact just published an article. Saine, who is a young, upcoming scholar, it just came out sometime, maybe about a month ago,
Wonderful.
in a journal article.
Wonderful.
So we're working on the book.
Good. So you have also published peer-reviewed journals and articles.
Yes.
I'll just go through a few of them. We have a rather long list of publications and conferences attended. But I'll just read out a few, and we leave it at that, because otherwise we will spend the whole day reviewing your CV. One of the articles is entitled "The New Gambia, 360-degree Foreign Policy Pivot." That's a commissioned paper written for the Foreign Policy magazine.
Yes.
This was in 2018. Right. There's this paper also, Critical Holistic Educational Model, Reconstructing a Post-Jami Democratic Society in the Gambia.
That was done with my wife, yes.
That was done with your wife, yes. It's a family of scholars, isn't it?
It is.
Then there's this article, The Effects of Policies on Consumption Pattern Change in the Gambia, with Usman Gajigo.
Usman, yes.
Yes. And it's published on the Review of African Political Journal, volume 38. Yes. Another one, Taming the Dragon, outlining an African response to growing Chinese engagement. That would be interesting.
Yes, thank you.
Taming the Dragon. Is the dragon tameable? Then another article, Gambia's 2006 presidential elections, change or continuity? I imagine it became continuity.
Yes.
Only change in 2016.
Yes.
Interesting. Another article, very interesting title, The Gambia's Elected Autocrat. The Gambia's Elected Autocrat. Poverty, peripherality, and political instability. Political scientists are prone to big and high-polluting words. Some of these are difficult to pronounce. Peripherality and political instability. We should bring Baba Galo here to assist in these big words. And then this article, The Presidential and National Assembly Elections, the Gambia 2006 and 2007.
Yes.
That's on electoral studies. And this other article, The Gambia's Changing Political, Economic, and Social Landscape. That was in 2003. And another article, The October 2001 Presidential Elections in the Gambia. Another article, Post-Coup Politics in the Gambia. And another article, The Military and Human Rights in the Gambia. I would imagine that all these articles are relevant
Absolutely.
to the kind of task you've been asked to do.
Yes.
You published another article, The Soldier Turned Presidential Candidate, a comparison of flawed transitions in Ghana and Gambia. So this would be a comparison between Jerry Rawlings and Yahya Jammeh,
yes.
Pretty much. Quite on point. And there's this article, The Gambia's Foreign Policy Since the Coup, that was 1994 to 1999.
Yes, of course.
Another article, The Political Economy of Human Rights. The Political Economy of Human Rights.
Human rights.
State sovereignty and humanitarian military interventions in the post-Cold War era. This would be interesting, especially in view of the mindset of Gambian soldiers,
yes.
that it's their responsibility to overthrow a government that they believe is not performing. So we'd be interested in examining that.
Okay.
You also published an article on the military's managed transition to civilian rule in the Gambia. AFPRC to APRC.
Yes.
So it's like the military's managed transition to civilian rule. Interesting. Another article, Vision 2020, the Gambia's neoliberal strategy for social and economic development. We were supposed to be Singapore today.
Yes.
That's what it means, right? So then another article, the 1996-1997 presidential and National Assembly elections in the Gambia. And another one, coup d'etat in the Gambia, 1994, end of the First Republic, armed forces and society. Another article, Anglo-American realist theories of international politics, an Afrocentric critic. Wow. Another article, a note on U.S. foreign policy and aid to Africa. And you also have some articles in progress. Interesting one, 1 year into the Barrow presidency in the Gambia. Okay. And there are also requested chapters you are working on for some books, and that is still in progress. And you have also done some chapters in peer-reviewed books, a number of them. So I won't go into them.
Thank you.
Perhaps my colleague has been kind enough to identify this one. It's Realizing Women's Equality Rights in Africa, the delicate balance between culture and the universality of rights. Wow.
Absolutely.
CEDAW and Gambia's approach to women's rights. That must be it, right? So I won't go more into them, but there is this interesting one, the military and democratization in the Gambia. That should be an interesting reading. Thank you. So perhaps I should leave it at that for the purposes of publications. You have also done encyclopedia entries, like the Gambia, an encyclopedia of culture and society. The Gambia, that's history and politics. Gambia at crossroads. And the Gambia, deepening authoritarianism and economic crisis. That is quite on point. You have also granted interviews on BBC, Al Jazeera, Radio France International, Australia Broadcasting Services, that is ABS, as well as online radios following the 2016 presidential elections. You've also conducted radio interview on Zimbabwe following the fall of Robert Mugabe, Voice of America, and also with Pa Nderimbai. You've also published on newspapers. So you've participated in several conferences and gave several lectures as an invited lecturer. And so I think, Mr. Chair, I think that is really enough to show the expertise that our witness has to deal with this particular subject. I would ask that the CV is admitted into the record as Exhibit 108B for further reference by the Commission. With your permission, Mr. Chair.
A request granted, and so.
And now let's go to the heart of the issues, Dr. Saine.
Yes.
As as a result of the terms of reference you were given, you produced a report of 59 pages, correct?
Yes.
And do you have a copy of the report with you?
Yes, I do.
Mr. Chair, perhaps I should just ask at the outset that we put the report in evidence and then allow Professor Saine to explain parts of the report for the Commission's better understanding. And with your permission, the report should be marked Exhibit 108C.
Request granted.
The report was produced or finalized on October 30, 2019. And Mr. Saine, do you have a copy of the report with you?
Yes, I do.
Could you kindly tell us your methodology in producing this report?
Thank you, Counsel. The report basically proceeds from an historical political analysis, which looked at the major forces, factors that gave rise to the events leading to the coup and thereafter. The methodology also is comparative. It's comparative because I look at other cases as a way of fleshing out those factors that would be germane to explaining the questions or responding to the questions that you had given. So methodologically, it also appropriates, takes from political science, sociology, economics, gender studies, critical race theory, and a host of others to really shed light on a very complex situation. So at the end of the day, the methodology was very comprehensive and to some extent selective.
But that said, the report is not without limitations.
Yes.
In fact, you identified two main limitations. I'm referring to page 5 of your report,
Yes.
Paragraph 6, wherein you stated as follows: the report has, excuse me, two main limitations. First, one needed at least a year to research and write a report of this magnitude and significance with support of a research staff. Instead, 6 weeks were devoted to producing a first draft and 3 months to complete the report. Notwithstanding, this report is by far the most comprehensive single document that provides specific answers to political and human rights violations under Yahya Jammeh until 2017. Well, that by itself also suggests that what in fact appeared to be a limitation is in fact not a limitation.
It's a strength, yes.
But you acknowledge that still we could do better with this report. Perhaps that is something we can come back to, Mr. Chair, at the end of this hearing. You also went on to say that notwithstanding, the report paints a compelling picture and distills from the large academic literature and my personal experience on Gambia to respond to the pre-assigned questions and 2 additional ones on my own. In the end, the report's primary strength lies in the comprehensive conceptual framework it offers. Another is the report's nimbleness in offering new and refreshing insights from within which to locate or slot additional data, including ongoing witness testimonies. Ultimately, this report is solid foundation for a more comprehensive feature book-length report on TRRC proceedings. Though a Herculean task, this is feasible with adequate institutional support. Maybe the chairman would be inclined to provide such support, so that perhaps
Yes.
a more thorough book could be provided as an appendix to the report on these issues, including possibly recommendations that would prevent the creation and sustenance of a dictatorship in the future. The chairman is looking at me like, what are you saying?
No, I do follow what you're saying. Yeah, I wasn't sure that I wanted to be committed so early. Wait a little bit.
Indeed. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
With Saine, any commitment I would do.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, Professor Saine, let's go to the heart of the issues. You provided a background to what led to the creation of the person we ultimately called Babili Mansa or Nasiruddin. You started by giving us a background to the 1994 coup d'etat.
Yes.
Could you, I'm referring specifically to paragraph 8 on page 5 of the report.
Yes.
Could you take us through that historical analysis, please?
Thank you, Lead Chair. What I try to do in this section is to provide a backdrop to the causes of the coup d'etat in 1994. But I even go further by looking at the political context, economic context during the First Republic. And this served as the basis for the analysis that was to come in the 1994 coup d'etat discussion. Very quickly, for analytical purposes, I looked at it from a variety of levels of analysis, as we would say. First was the individual. What were the individual motivations? What were the primary reasons and justifications for the coup d'etat that was provided by the coup conspirators? In this, we look at their values, we look at their background, we look at their orientations, we look at their operational codes, which is a psychology term. What is that really makes them tick? For instance, with reference to Jami. I believe that this is a very important vantage point to look at in efforts to look at, to understand the coup d'etat precisely. It is also important to look at the military as an institution, as an organization, to look at the cleavages, the ranks, the hierarchy, the culture, the differences, the rivalries, the frustrations, and the deprivations, to understand very precisely what factors from that organization impacted or contributed to the coup d'etat. I also believe that there are environmental. By environmental, I mean the larger society, the larger country, the socio-economic conditions in the country, deepening poverty in the country, social class differences as they were emerging in the country, in the Gambia. All this, I believe, converged in some degree to be the precipitants of the coup d'etat. Another factor that do you want me to go on or just pause?
Yes, proceed, please.
Okay.
Proceed.
All the factors that I looked at fleetingly were the sub-regional and the global. Sub-regional basically meaning the West Africa sub-region, which was very turbulent at the time. Gambia then at the time was the oasis, or a democracy oasis, or an oasis of democracy, stability, against a backdrop of military regimes in Nigeria, a raging civil war in Sierra Leone and Liberia, and so forth and so on. All this, I believe, contributed in no insignificant ways to causing the coup.
Yes, you identified 5 or 6 factors.
Yes.
And you started with a background to an understanding of these factors that you later identified. And in that background, you really talked about the effect of the coup d'etat on politics in Gambia. Say paragraph 9, for instance, you talked about how the 1994 coup d'etat toppled the PPP government, and its significance, the importance of that. First, it ended the 30-year rule of Jawara, who was the longest serving president at the time. And could you take us through that a bit so that we just understand what the 1994 coup d'etat did and the historical antecedents of that coup d'etat, starting from the Senegambia Confederation, the end of that confederation, the PPP Congress in Mansakonko, and the issue, the question of democracy and all that.
Yes.
Just to give us a background on these issues.
Gambia gained independence in 1965, as all of us know, amid a lot of challenges, both economic, political, social, and so forth and so on. Under the First Republic and under Sadauda, and the PPP government in particular, they were able to craft an economic policy that was predicated on free market mechanisms. In doing so, Sadauda, with the PPP government, were also able, or succeeded to some degree, in implementing, growing some form of democracy with respect for human rights, the rule of law, and so forth and so on. Over time, with economic downturns arising from the 1974 oil crisis, structural adjustment, ERP, most of you know this history, Gambia began to go through convulsive economic problems.
But in spite of all these problems, you would agree that the Gambia maintained a very healthy and, in fact, enviable human rights record.
Absolutely.
When the rest of the continent was, according to you,
mired,
almost mired in dictatorial mismanagement and economic decline.
Absolutely.
But so Gambia was doing well,
very well,
with regards to human rights in that front. Okay. All right, proceed, please. And just sorry to cut you, and that won Sadauda, as you stated in your report, I'm referring to page 6, considerable respect from his peers in the continent.
Yes, Sadauda was highly respected, not only because of his temperament and his liberal values, but he was also a very humble man. And I think this won him many accolades, not only nationally and in the sub-region, but also internationally.
In your report, you also indicated that his modest development plan improved health, education, and basic services with support from the UK and from Japan.
Yes.
But you went on to say that this was not enough. What happened in 81?
In 1981, there was an attempted coup, a combination of civilian and field force elements sought to overthrow the government of Saadauda. As you said correctly, Saadauda had clearly made some improvements in the economy, in health, maternal health, education, infrastructure, and a host of other things. And I make that assessment based on the fact, for those of us who are much older and traveled the country widely, it was difficult to travel. Communication was difficult, to say the least. But that wasn't enough. In addition to the social and economic differentiation that was also occurring in the country. I believe by the 1980s, there appeared to have emerged clear class or social distinctions between the relatively wealthy and the mass of the population who, for the most part, lived in poverty. This created grievances. Over time, this took on a national dimension. The military also, because of its own internal cleavages and frustrations, these combined, some would argue, to precipitate the 1981 coup attempt headed by Coup Saine.
And in the immediate aftermath, we had a marriage of convenience.
Marriage of convenience, yes.
Could you tell us about that?
In short, many believe that Saadauda's arm was twisted by President Abdou because the perception is there had been a long-standing interest of having closer relations between the two countries, Senegal and Gambia. And this, many would argue, was an attempt by Senegal to muzzle, basically to bring in Gambia as a region of Senegal. This was very much resisted by Gambians at large and Saadauda in particular. I think part of the problem arose in the Confederation when Saadauda sought to have the presidency of the Confederation rotated. And this really led, to some degree, to the demise of the Confederation in '89.
With the end of the Confederation in 1989, the economic problems in the Gambia deepened. Could you tell us more about that? I'm referring mainly to paragraph 11 of your report.
Okay. The coup, or the aftermath of the coup, saw a lot of economic problems, challenges. But before then, there was really very healthy international goodwill. Gambia received millions of dollars or pounds in an effort to rebuild the country. And to some degree, this succeeded. But at the same time, economic problems arising from structural adjustment, ERP, the downsizing of many workers had a very negative effect, social and economic effects on the country. And this further sharpened the grievances, the dissatisfaction, or in a sense, relative deprivation, not only in the country, but I would say amongst most individuals in higher-ups.
In your report, you stated as follows, I'll read this. The interventions you mentioned earlier, that this was not enough, however, to address mounting unemployment and growing domestic discontent over economic and income disparities. In time, critics of Saadauda and his government singled him out for economic policies that failed to improve living conditions for the bulk of Gambians. And before long, these economic grievances combined with corruption charges to erode his legitimacy. In time, general public perceptions of pervasive economic malfeasance in the form of high per diems and other travel allowances reignited charges of corruption against the regime and Jawara himself.
Yes.
Those are very strong charges. So this is the mood, as it were, in the early 90s.
Yes.
In 1992, there was talk of changing of the guard. Tell us about that. Paragraph 12, page 6 of your report.
In Mansakonko in 1992, Saadada had announced to the PPP Congress his desire to step down as party leader and secretary general. Now, the response was mixed. There were those on one hand who believed that he should stay on. There were a few individuals, on the other hand, who felt that he should probably honor his promise. In the end, he stayed, which I think was a big mistake, because shortly thereafter, these aforementioned problems began to fester, to permeate society and the newly established army. And before long, these grievances surfaced and culminated in the 1994 coup d'etat.
Let me just take you back a little bit.
Okay.
Back to maybe Mansa Konko.
Okay.
The way it is written here is so catching. I just have to put that in the record. You talked about how Jawara's decision or his pronouncement in Mansa Konko created two camps. You said this, and I quote, "This fueled speculation of a deeply fractured party and government. Political reforms, which were never as deep as the economic ones, resulted in complacency and a fossilized party machinery. And while elections in large measure were generally seen to be relatively free and fair with little political violence, critics charged it as a symbocracy, that is, ruled by might, as 5 successive elections that returned the PPP to power met little to no political opposition."
Yes.
So in a sense, the symbocracy, as you called it, of the PPP meant that there was no hope of change through the ballot box, doesn't it?
Yes. In fact, there was a general perception that Saadawda could not be dislodged from power by elections.
And in paragraph 13 of your report, you went on to say as follows. I would read this out also. It says, "In the year leading to the 1994 coup, state and PPP government authority weakened further, resulting in confusion over institutional checks to mitigate rising popular tensions and brewing grievances within the army itself. In the same vein, institutions of governments tasked with conflict resolution and protection of citizen and national security were themselves ineffective and engulfed in complacency and political patronage. Thus, under President Jara's leadership, the Gambia's political history resembled a plateau occasionally marred by volcanic eruptions. The general image, too often projected to the world outside, was a mini-state adept at survival, able in spite of its size and limited resources to run a multi-party democracy. This image was shattered on July 22nd, 1994, when President Jara and his ruling PPP government were overthrown in a bloodless coup by the Gambia National Army.
Yes.
So this aura, this image
Was shattered.
was shattered. Yes. You went on to identify the factors that lead to the coup. We have had a number of witnesses from the Gambia National Army and also from the public service who gave us their own take as to how and why the coup d'etat happened. Now let's examine the factors that you identified, the individual factors. Could you start with that, please?
The individual factors looked at the co-conspirators, their motivations, their values, from where they came. In looking at coup d'etats, it is important to focus on this dimension, because many times coup d'etats occur not for what they say, but for what they do. They provide justifications, corruption, and even though corruption was rife, some would argue, it wasn't to the extent of being important enough, but it was still a justification provided by Jami and his cohort. More importantly, though, we wanted to look at what motivated them. What were the economic and political factors that forced them, or at least inspired them, to carry out the coup d'etat? Well, given their backgrounds, relatively low education, low wages, social status was relatively very low. These were important factors, I believe, in the causes of the coup. So while they were saying that it was corruption and living a life of affluence, well, I think deeper reasons existed. Self-aggrandizement, greed, and a host of other things. So this individual level looks at those.
Let me read out what you said in paragraph 14,
Okay.
the individual factors. You said, this level explores important personal motivations that inspired the coup conspirators led by Lieutenants Yaya Jami, Sana Sabali, Edward Singate, and Sadibu Haidara. Maybe we should add Yankuba Ture as well.
Ture, yes, absolutely.
Consensus has built over time that these young and mostly inexperienced junior officers were motivated to stage the 1994 coup primarily by personal economic gain and improvement, and certainly their quest for political power. Mr. Singate denied that. He thought they were making a sacrifice to relieve the country from the cusp of an ineffective and corrupt government. That's the way they put it. But you said they are to be judged not by the words they say, but by what they do.
Absolutely.
You went on to say, coming from relatively poor and rural backgrounds with minimal education and enjoying little social and economic status in the communities from which they came and the country at large, a coup was a way of addressing these personal grievances against a government that was generally perceived as corrupt and divided. A government that had not served them well, even as students in schools, and certainly not while they were in the army. Specifically, individual junior officer frustration within the GNA itself over less than adequate living conditions, paltry salaries and benefits, limited opportunity for professional advancement and promotions were just as important motivations for the junior officer-led coup. Also, growing tensions within the military generally and between Nigerian senior military and Gambian junior officers, specifically over leadership, professional commitment concerns surpassing the divide between the officer ranks.
Yes.
Interesting idea. They deny some of these. They said that the junior officers were not necessarily hungry for power. Some said that we have a mixed bag.
Yes.
Some of the officers told us conditions in the army were good, the salaries were fine. Others tend to align with you that the salaries were poor, the benefits were poor, the living conditions were poor, there were hardly enough room for advancement, and there was this disagreement or dissatisfaction with about the presence of the Nigerians in the army. You tend to align your conclusion with that school of thought.
Yes.
That say things were bad in the army.
Yes, and really, if you look at the causes of coups, not only in the Gambia, but in West Africa, in Latin America, and a host of other places, the literature is overwhelmingly in support of the position that I took, and many others have taken in the past, basically suggesting that living conditions, at least from this analysis, tends to be an important factor in the causes of coup d'etats. And go ahead.
And in your theory, personal ambition forms or was part or one of the most important motivating factors.
Yes.
In fact, here you stated it as follows. I'm looking at paragraph 15.
Okay.
Personal ambition coupled with prospects of monetary gain and for enhanced social standing combined to motivate the junior officer to execute the coup, to partly camouflage their true motivations and interest. They appropriated and used a discourse that aligned with IMF or World Bank principles of transparency, accountability, and probity, claiming to be soldiers with a difference. These pronouncements and slogans served them well as they sought popular support, which they had at the beginning. However, in time, it became apparent that the AFPRC junta exhibited worse tendencies of corruption and lived more flamboyant lifestyle than had the previous government ministers and certainly President Jawara.
Absolutely.
That's an indictment, isn't it?
Yes.
They said they came to ensure transparency and accountability and to remove flamboyance from public service. You are saying that is exactly what they did themselves.
And worse.
And worse. Well, we would find out. You tried to help us understand the mindset of these soldiers as they sought to really do what was necessary to ultimately achieve their aims of transforming themselves both socially and financially. Could you further explain that to us, please? Dissect that, break down the operational code of Jami for us.
Operational code is a term borrowed from social psychology. The intention is to look at the psychological makeup of individuals in terms of their personality, their values and mores, their worldview in some. Because it is through this operational code that they construct their own realities. Jami, clearly, as I have said in the report much further down, was the byproduct of African, Jola, Christian, Islamic, and other traditions. And
What other traditions do you have in mind?
I am thinking more in terms of a Pan-Africanist tradition that influenced him in his thinking. In fact, his birthday coincided with African Liberation Day, which is May 25th. Some dispute that was in his birthday. Others argue that he was very much influenced by Islamic traditional values. And of course, one that I talk about in the report is the Nongo mentality. Nongo mentality, not meaning an urchin per se, but somebody
Not
who...
meaning a bandy as
Not a bandy, yes. Somebody who was very street smart. So he embodied all these alongside his co-conspirators. It is important to dissect, therefore, to look at this very carefully, because this is what really leads him or led him to make the kinds of decisions that he made. So by understanding this cognitive element, I think we are better able to then understand from where he came.
In paragraph 17 of your report, you stated as follows. Jami and his cohort have been shaped by African, Islamic, Western, and Christian values, as well as a melange of various political ideologies.
Yes.
Typically, these traditions construct the world in black and white, good and evil, and human beings as inherently and essentially evil and sinful. For these men, and many in military-like institutions, the world is a dangerous place, and humans, like states, are self-interested entities that pursue personal and state interest respectively. Thus, politics are perceived as a zero-sum, a winner-take-all game. That's interesting, isn't it?
That is the mindset of realists, or what we call political realists.
You went on to say, consequently, it is in one's interest, therefore, to amass power and wealth, even at the expense of others and neighboring states. In sum, it is a dog-eat-dog world, and the likes of Jami had constructed their worldviews, hence realities, and of politics in these terms. So that's the way he saw the world.
Yes.
It was a dog-eat-dog world.
Yes.
Zero-sum game.
It's a zero-sum game.
Take no prisoners.
Yes.
Get it at all costs.
Yes.
That's your view, right?
Yes, that's my view.
You went on to say that many individuals who join military institutions for lack of other opportunities tend to be rigid in their thinking and find competing and contradictory knowledge claims psychologically unsettling. Uncomfortable and unsettling emotions are typically filtered out through denial and the process of cognitive dissonance.
Yes.
Could you explain that, please? Cognitive dissonance?
Okay. Again, this is a psychological term that basically suggests that information coming in that doesn't align with your thinking, with the previously discussed worldview, is sidelined, is eliminated for all intents and purposes, so that you maintain, as a result, the viewpoint that you've held for a long time. Anything that contradicts your viewpoint is disruptive, is uncomfortable.
Is that why you said that, and I quote, accustomed to issuing orders or decrees at will,
Yes.
military personnel often find civilian decision-making process and democracy itself as slow and tedious.
Yes.
And maybe ineffective.
Very.
And you went on to say, Jami, at one time in his formal education or military training, was also exposed to elements of the political philosophy of Machiavelli and certainly Marx. Still you're reinforcing this issue of dog eat, dog world,
yes.
Get it at all costs. The ends would justify the means.
Yes.
Machiavelli.
Yes, Machiavelli.
Those are very strong words. But to help us better understand Jami, in paragraph 19, you stated quite interesting things. You said Jami's worldview is also infused with beliefs of witchcraft or the occult to buttress his view of an evil world inhabited by demons and evildoers. Therefore, a combination of upbringing, norms and cultural values, religious and Western philosophical thought may have formed the basis of his reality. This is the frame or lens he and others like him would have utilized or arrived at decisions. In a sense, it is a socially constructed world which is consistent with his political and economic interest. To add to this level, we look to the army as an organization and how that might have contributed to the 1994 coup. In a sense, you're telling us that his Machiavellian approach to things is also influenced by or infused with other beliefs,
yes,
like witchcraft, occultism, and so forth.
Yes. And this really was how he constructed his world. The idea is that we construct our worlds. There is no reality out there as we speak. We can never sense or feel reality directly. Reality is always mediated by sensory perception. So what I or anybody else, including Jami, we make the world what it is. We create our own worlds with our ideas, our interests, and so forth and so on. And when these ideas change, the world subsequently changes. So it is a social construction.
It's now 11:45.
Okay.
We will take a short break with your permission, Mr. Chair. And when we resume, we would examine the other factors you identified, starting with the organizational or institutional factors that led to the 1994 coup d'etat. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you, Professor Saine. What a splendid start to studying and understanding the mind of a dictator. We will take a break and come back at 12:15. We have an event outside that we need to be part of at the moment. So, meeting is adjourned. We will resume at 12:15.
Hi, my name is Amisana, founder and owner of Her Apparel, a mother's clothing brand. Tough Startup has been one of the best things that ever happened to my life, if not the best.
My name is Modula Fati, founder, farm manager, ML Poultry. Before Tough Startup 2018, this used to be my poultry house with about 200 chickens. Today, ML Poultry has just built a new farm with a production capacity of up to 4,000 chickens.
I'm Ivo Lawrence Mendy. I'm the CEO and the founder of Cameco. The top startup, we're able to register the company in Ghana as a limited, let's Ride Africa Ghana Limited.
I urge every single young entrepreneur out there to give it a try. It's a life-changing experience.